The roar was distant at first, then a splintering crescendo that echoed through the valley, not of thunder, but of destruction. My $1.8 million bridge, a lifetime of sweat and dreams, vanished into the churning river below, reduced to splinters. I watched, helpless, the gaping wound in the landscape, a mirror to the one tearing through my soul. She did this. Karen. And as the waters rose, swallowing her farm in a deluge of my own making, a cold, predatory smile touched my lips. But I didn't see the black sedans or the figures in crisp, uncreased uniforms emerging from the dust cloud. Their eyes devoid of warmth, and the badge on their chest looked wrong, very, very wrong. Silas Blackwood stood on the precipice of his world, quite literally. The ground beneath his custom-made work boots, usually solid and familiar, now ended abruptly, a jagged scar where his magnificent timber and steel bridge had once gracefully spanned the Blackwater River. His breath hitched, a raw, ragged sound clawing its way from his chest. Just yesterday it had been there, an engineering marvel, a testament to his decades of hard-won skill, and the crown, jewel of his construction company's legacy. Today, only a tangled mess of steel rebar and splintered wood bobbed sluggishly in the churning brown current, a watery graveyard of ambition. His mind, usually a well-oiled machine of calculations and designs, spun wildly, trying to reconcile the impossible. The bridge, his bridge, was gone. Not collapsed from structural failure, not swept away by some freak flood. This was deliberate. The ragged edges of the remaining abutments, the scorch marks on the fractured concrete, the eerie silence of the valley that had replaced the familiar rush of the river under the suspended roadway. It screamed sabotage. His eyes, narrowed to angry slits, instinctively scanned across the river, past the debris to the sprawling green expanse of Willow Creek Farm. Karen Eldridge's farm. The woman who had fought him, tooth and nail, for the past 2 years, trying to block every permit, every material delivery, every single screw he'd put into that bridge. She claimed it blocked her ancestral view, whatever the hell that meant, and that its presence disturbed the natural flow of her prized organic crops. Silas had dismissed her as a meddling, entitled eccentric, a city transplant with too much money and too little understanding of how the real world and real livelihoods functioned. Now the full, terrifying scope of her entitlement had unfurled, itself like a poisoned banner. A guttural roar tore from Silas's throat, raw and animalistic, echoing off the steep banks. He stumbled back, his hands clenching into fists, knuckles white. The $1.8 million bridge wasn't just a structure. It was the financial backbone of his company for the next 5 years, securing his crew's jobs and providing a vital new shortcut for local commerce, linking the two halves of a previously divided county. It was a promise made, a legacy built, and she had taken it. He scrambled down the embankment, ignoring the loose scree and the biting wind, until he stood at the very edge of the newly widened riverbank. The water level was higher than usual, swollen from the recent spring rains, adding a menacing current to the destruction. He knew this river like the back of his hand. He'd fished it as a boy, swum its depths as a teenager, and eventually built over it as a man. He knew its secrets, its hidden veins, its pressure points. A dangerous idea, born of pure, unadulterated rage, began to coalesce in his mind. He reached for his satellite phone, his fingers trembling with a mixture of fury and adrenaline. He needed to call the sheriff, the state police, anyone. But then he paused, his gaze sweeping over the wreckage again, and the simmering rage hardened into a cold, cutting resolve. This wasn't a job for the law. This was personal. This was war. An hour later, Silas was back at his isolated workshop, a sprawling collection of corrugated steel sheds tucked away in a dense thicket of pines, a mile upstream from the bridge site. He was pulling on his heavy-duty work gloves, his movements precise, almost surgical despite the tremor in his hands. His face was a mask of grim determination, his jaw set, a vein throbbing visibly in his temple. "You're really going to do this, boss?" asked Jimmy the Hook Miller, Silas's grizzled foreman, his voice laced with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Jimmy had seen Silas angry before, but never like this. This was a different beast entirely. Silas didn't look up from checking the fuel line on the excavator's massive engine. "She took everything, Jimmy. Everything I built, everything my crew worked for. You see any other options?" Jimmy ran a hand over his thinning hair. "Reckon not, but flooding her whole farm? That's biblical, Silas. She's got those fancy organic crops, that prize-winning hydroponics setup. That's her whole livelihood." Silas finally met Jimmy's gaze, his eyes flinty. "And the bridge wasn't mine? The $1.8 million investment? The years of planning, the contracts, the jobs? What about my livelihood, Jimmy? What about all of ours? She wants a war. She's damn well going to get one. I'm just giving her a taste of her own medicine." He climbed into the cab of the massive yellow excavator, its tracks groaning under his weight. This particular model, a custom-built, heavy-duty monster, was usually reserved for serious demolition or large-scale earth-moving. Today, it would be his instrument of vengeance. "Stay here, Jimmy. Make sure no one comes snooping around. And if anyone asks, I'm out checking the old logging trails for erosion." Jimmy nodded slowly, his expression grim. He knew the depths of Silas's fury, and he knew that once Silas's mind was made up, there was no turning back. Silas drove the excavator along a rarely used dirt track, hugging the riverbank upstream from Willow Creek Farm. He knew the old, neglected irrigation canals that crisscrossed the valley, remnants of a forgotten agricultural era. Most were overgrown, choked with weeds and debris, their sluice gates rusted shut. But Silas, with his innate understanding of the land and its forgotten arteries, knew exactly where to find the weakest point, the forgotten valve. He stopped the excavator at a narrow bend in the river, hidden from view by a thick stand of weeping willows. Here, an ancient, barely discernible embankment separated the main river channel from a series of lower-lying fields that bordered Karen Eldridge's farm. A dilapidated, moss-covered stone sluice gate, long disused, stood precariously in the bank. It was meant to control water flow from the river into a network of old irrigation ditches that eventually fed into Karen's lower fields. Silas knew that the neglect had weakened its foundations, making it a prime candidate for a little re-engineering. He maneuvered the excavator, its massive arm extending, the steel bucket gleaming in the harsh midday sun. He positioned the bucket just above the ancient stone gate, the hydraulics hissing softly. This wasn't about subtle adjustments. It was about overwhelming force. With a deep breath, he pushed the lever forward. The excavator's arm plunged downward, the bucket biting, into the earth around the gate, tearing at the ancient mortar and crumbling stone. Dust and spray exploded upwards as the first sections of the embankment gave way. The ground vibrated violently beneath him. He could hear the grinding protest of the old gate as it fractured, then the sickening crack of ancient stone as it finally buckled under the immense pressure. Water, initially a trickle, began to gush through the newly created breach, a powerful brown torrent. Silas didn't stop. He widened the gap, deepening the channel, carving out a new path for the raging Blackwater River. The roar of the released water joined the grumble of the excavator's engine, a symphony of destruction. Within minutes, the river was surging into the network of old ditches overflowing their banks and racing towards Willow Creek Farm. He watched, grim-faced, as the water, now a mini tsunami, swept across the lower fields, submerging rows of meticulously planted organic crops. The vibrant green of Karen's prized kale and arugula vanished beneath a muddy, swirling tide. He could imagine her fury, her disbelief, a perverse satisfaction, cold and sharp, coiled in his gut. This was justice, swift and brutal. An eye for an eye, a bridge for a farm. As the water spread, inching ever closer to the main farmhouse and the state-of-the-art greenhouses he knew Karen was so proud of, Silas climbed out of the excavator. He surveyed his handiwork, the newly created tributary, now a raging river in its own right, carving new channels where only dry earth had been moments before. He felt a grim exhilaration, a dark triumph. It was done. He drove the excavator back to the workshop, the mud-splashed machine leaving a telltale trail. He spent the next hour meticulously cleaning every visible trace, hosing down the tracks and wiping down the cab. He needed to be meticulous. This was an act of vengeance, yes, but it also had to be deniable. Later that afternoon, Silas sat on his porch, a mug of lukewarm coffee in his hand, watching the evening light soften the edges of the valley. He felt strangely calm, the adrenaline receding, replaced by a weary satisfaction. The phone, which had been buzzing with worried calls from his crew about the bridge, was now silent. He knew the news would spread like wildfire. He also knew Karen Eldridge wouldn't take this lying down. The question. Silas Blackwood stood on his porch, the twilight deepening around him, casting long, menacing shadows from the three figures in black. The leader, still obscured by sunglasses, held the gate latch, but did not open it. The implied threat hung, heavy in the air, a silent ultimatum. "So, what's your plan, fellas?" Silas finally managed, his voice hoarse, but with a defiant tremor. "You going to drag me out of here? No local sheriff, no lawyers, just your made-up agency and a warrant. You probably printed off the internet?" The leader's voice remained flat, devoid of emotion. "We prefer cooperation, Mr. Blackwood. It makes things easier for everyone. You come with us voluntarily, you'll have the opportunity to explain your actions. Resist, and we will be forced to use necessary measures." "Necessary measures?" Silas scoffed, a dark laugh bubbling up. "Is that what you call kidnapping? Because that's what this feels like. You don't have jurisdiction here. This is local land, local issues." "The Blackwater River is a federally designated critical waterway," the leader corrected, a hint of steel entering his tone. "And Willow Creek Farm is registered as a protected agricultural preserve. Your actions fall squarely under our purview. We have ample legal authority to detain you." Silas knew he was in trouble. Real trouble. This wasn't some minor local dispute. Karen had clearly pulled strings he hadn't even imagined existed, and the sheer audacity of it, creating a fake federal agency. It was genius in a twisted, terrifying way. He looked past them, down the long gravel drive. No other cars, no neighbors. Just the three enforcers and their sleek, silent sedan. "You show me a real warrant, signed by a real judge, and maybe we can talk," Silas challenged, taking a cautious step back, his hand still hovering near the doorframe where his rifle usually was. He knew it was empty. A useless prop. The leader's hand dropped from the gate latch, moving subtly inside his jacket. "This is your last opportunity, Mr. Blackwood." Silas saw the glint of metal, not a gun, but what looked like a taser, strapped to the man's belt. He had seconds. He had to think. All right, Silas said, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender, his eyes darting quickly around the porch. "Just let me grab my jacket. It's getting cold." The leader paused, perhaps, detecting the false note of compliance, but he didn't stop Silas from turning and taking a step towards the front door. It was then that Silas executed his desperate gamble. Instead of reaching for a jacket, his hand lashed out, grabbing the heavy cast-iron bell that hung by the door, used to call in his crew for meals. With a grunt, he yanked it from its rusty bracket and swung it with all his might, not at the men, but at the porch post. The clang of metal on wood was deafening, a sharp, resonant peal that tore through the quiet evening. The three men flinched, momentarily disoriented by the unexpected noise. It was all the opening Silas needed. He didn't waste a second. He burst through the front door, not into the living room, but through the back door, crashing through the screen. He sprinted across his overgrown backyard, dodging rusted farm equipment and piles of old lumber. He knew this land like the back of his hand. Every dip, every rise, every hidden thicket. "He's fleeing!" He heard the leader bark, his voice losing its detached calm for the first time. "Apprehend him!" Footsteps pounded. Behind him. He heard the rustle of leaves, the snap of twigs. He was faster than they looked, those men in their neat uniforms. But Silas was a child of this land, his lungs accustomed to the steep climbs and thick undergrowth. He plunged into the dense woods that bordered his property, not towards the main road, but deeper into the wilderness, towards the winding deer. Trails and the treacherous ravines he knew lay beyond. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs ached, the distant shouts of the federal agents slowly fading behind him. He didn't stop until he reached a small hidden cave, camouflaged by a tangle of thorny bushes and a cascading spring. It was an old childhood hideout, known only to him and perhaps his deceased grandfather. He collapsed inside, gasping for breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was safe for now, but his situation was dire. He was a fugitive, hunted by a shadowy, seemingly omnipotent force backed by Karen Eldridge's money and influence. He had no phone, no car, no way to reach Jimmy or anyone who could help. He was completely cut off, isolated in the very wilderness he usually controlled. Hours later, the moon was high, casting a ghostly glow through the trees. Silas, shivering from the cold and the lingering adrenaline, finally dared to move. He had to get to town. He had to figure out what was happening. More importantly, he had to expose Karen. He navigated the familiar trails by moonlight, his movements slow and cautious. He heard no more shouts, no more engine hums. They must have given up, or perhaps they were setting up a perimeter. He had to assume the latter. He reached the outskirts of the nearest town, Riverbend, just before dawn. The small community was still asleep, a few streetlights casting pools of yellow light on empty sidewalks. He knew a few people here, people who owed him favors, people who would believe him. His first stop was the gas station owned by Old Man Henderson, who usually opened before the sun. Silas slipped around to the back, where a rusted Ford pickup, Henderson's pride and joy, sat parked. He knew where Henderson kept a spare key, a habit born of years of trusting neighbors. He hot-wired the truck in minutes, a skill he'd picked up from his misspent youth, and eased it silently out of the lot. He didn't dare turn on the headlights, until he was miles out of town, heading for the county seat, where he knew a seasoned private investigator, an old acquaintance from a previous legal dispute, might be able to help. The drive was tense, his eyes constantly scanning the rear view mirror. Every car, every shadow felt like a threat. He was a wanted man, or at least made to feel like one. He rehearsed his story in his head, trying to make it sound believable. The bridge, the flood, the fake federal agents, it sounded insane even, to him. He reached the private investigator's office, a dingy establishment above a pawn shop, just as the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon. The sign above the door read, "Mitch Donovan, Discreet Inquiries." He hammered on the door, ignoring the protests of his throbbing knuckles. After several long minutes, the door creaked open, revealing a gaunt man with perpetually tired eyes, and a 5 o'clock shadow that seemed to be a permanent fixture. Mitch Donovan. Mitch blinked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Silas, what in God's name are you doing here at this hour? You look like you just wrestled a bear." Silas pushed past him, entering the cluttered office. "Worse, Mitch. Much worse. I need your help. Karen Eldridge. She's gone too far. She sent in fake police, fake federal agents. They tried to arrest me." Mitch stared at him, his brow furrowing. Fake federal agents? Silas, you hitting the whiskey a little early? Silas slammed his palm on Mitch's cluttered desk. No, I'm serious. They had uniforms, badges, everything. Called themselves the Federal Environmental Enforcement Agency. They said they had satellite, imagery, and GPS data. They knew I flooded her farm, Mitch. They knew everything. Mitch, a seasoned veteran of countless bizarre cases, sat down slowly, his tired eyes now sharp with a professional curiosity. Okay, slow down. Start from the beginning. The bridge, the flood, the fake feds. Every detail. Don't leave anything out. Silas launched into his story, the words tumbling out in a rush, detailing the destruction of his bridge, his vengeful act, and the chilling appearance of the black sedans. He watched Mitch's face carefully, searching for disbelief, but the PI's expression remained impassive, only a slight narrowing of his eyes indicating his absorption. When Silas finished, the room was silent, save for the hum of an old refrigerator. In the corner, Mitch leaned back in his creaking chair, steepling his fingers. Federal Environmental Enforcement Agency, huh? Never heard of them. And I keep pretty good tabs on every three-letter agency that might stick its nose into local business. I told you, Silas insisted. They're fake. Karen Eldridge probably paid them. She's got more money than God. Money can buy a lot, Silas, Mitch conceded. But buying a federal agency, that's a whole different ballgame. That's not just bribery, that's treason on a grand scale. Unless... Mitch's eyes suddenly widened, a flicker of understanding passing through them. He reached for an old, dust-covered desktop computer, its monitor flickering to life with a groan. His fingers, surprisingly nimble for a man his age, flew across the keyboard. Silas watched, anxious, as Mitch typed furiously, searching databases Silas had never even heard of. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then Mitch stopped, his posture stiffening. He leaned closer to the screen, his face pale. No way, he muttered, almost to himself. It can't be. Silas leaned forward, his heart pounding. What is it, Mitch? What did you find? Mitch turned, his face grim, his tired eyes now filled with a disturbing revelation. Silas, there is a Federal Environmental Enforcement Agency. It was disbanded almost 30 years ago after a massive... Mitch Donovan's words hung in the air, chilling Silas Blackwood to the bone. This isn't just Karen Eldridge, Silas. This is something much, much bigger than a personal vendetta. You didn't just flood her farm, Silas. You just stepped on the tail of a very old, very dangerous snake that was supposed to be dead. And they just showed you they're very much alive. Silas sank into the rickety chair opposite Mitch's desk, the exhaustion from his night of flight finally catching up to him. A disbanded federal agency, reactivated, for Karen's organic kale? His voice was a strained whisper of disbelief. Mitch shook his head, pushing his glasses up his nose. No, not for the kale, Silas. For whatever they want. Karen is a symptom, not the cause. She's got deep pockets, sure, but reactivating a ghost agency like the FEEA? That requires political muscle, influence that goes way beyond a wealthy socialite wanting to protect her heirloom tomatoes. This points to something systemic, something hidden. They call themselves environmental enforcement, but if the rumors from 30 years ago are true, they were more about control and coercion than conservation. Control over what? Silas demanded, his mind racing, trying to grasp the enormity of what Mitch was suggesting. Natural resources, land acquisition, maybe even political leverage, Mitch mused, leaning back, his eyes now distant, sifting through old, half-forgotten archives in his mind. The original FEEA was accused of using environmental regulations as a pretext to seize land, silence dissent, and push through agendas that benefited powerful private interests. It was a scandal that nearly brought down an administration. They shut it down, buried the files, purged the names. Or so we thought. So Karen is connected to these powerful interests. She must be, Mitch confirmed, his gaze returning to Silas. And you, my friend, just stumbled into their playground. You didn't just flood her farm, Silas. You interrupted their plans. Whatever those plans are, Karen's farm is a piece of their puzzle. And now, you're a loose end. Silas ran a hand over his face, feeling the grit of yesterday's dirt and the stubble of neglected sleep. So what do I do? Go to the real police? Tell them a ghost agency tried to arrest me? Mitch gave a wry smile. They'd think you were crazy, Silas. Or worse, they might just hand you over to these agents to avoid a headache. Remember, the official record says this agency doesn't exist. Anyone trying to claim it does, especially while admitting to felony, environmental damage, would be dismissed, discredited, or disappeared. Disappeared? Silas echoed, a new knot of fear tightening in his stomach. Let's just say the original FEIA had a reputation for making problems. Go away, Mitch said, his tone grim. We need proof, Silas. Undeniable proof that these men are operating outside the law and that Karen Eldridge is involved at a deeper level than just a personal vendetta. We need to expose them before they expose you, or worse. How do we get that? Mitch rose, walking to a grimy whiteboard covered in old notes and diagrams. He picked up a marker. First, we need to verify their operations. If they're reactivated, they'll have some kind of base, some kind of infrastructure. Second, we need to understand their connection to Karen. Why her farm? What's so special about Willow Creek? It's just a farm, Silas insisted. Expensive, organic, annoying, but just a farm. No farm is just a farm when a ghost federal agency is involved, Mitch countered. There's always a hidden agenda. And third, we need to gather evidence that proves they attempted an unlawful arrest. That's the key to making anyone listen. But they had satellite imagery, drone footage, Silas said, remembering the leader's chillingly precise claims. They know I did it. The flood, I mean. That's their leverage, Mitch said, tapping the whiteboard. They can use the legitimate crime you committed to cover up their illegitimate actions. We turn that around. We prove their actions are illegal, and your actions become a sideshow. Or at worst, self-defense. Silas thought about Jimmy, his loyal foreman. He needed to warn him, but also, Jimmy might be a resource. I have a guy, Jimmy, my foreman. He was there. He saw the agents arrive. Mitch nodded. Good, an eyewitness. But they'll discredit him. We need more. He paused, his gaze fixed on Silas. This is going to be dangerous, Silas. You're going up against people with incredible power and no apparent oversight. Are you in? Silas looked out the window at the rising sun, thinking of his destroyed bridge, of his livelihood, of the chilling eyes of the agents. He had nothing left to lose. I'm in, Mitch. What's the first step? Get some rest, Mitch said, pushing a spare cot from beneath a pile of old newspapers. Then we start digging. I'll make some discreet calls. You think about Willow Creek Farm. Every detail you know about it, every weird delivery, every strange visitor, every little thing Karen Eldridge has done that struck you as unusual. Because something tells me that farm is the heart of this snake. Over the next few days, Silas and Mitch worked in a clandestine alliance, operating from the PI's dingy office. Silas recounted every detail of his 2-year battle with Karen, every perceived eccentricity, every legal skirmish. He described the security Karen had at the farm, the unusual number of unmarked vehicles he'd seen, the constant stream of delivery trucks that always seemed to arrive at odd hours. Mitch, meanwhile, made his discreet inquiries tapping into a network of former law enforcement contacts, disillusioned government bureaucrats, and shadowy information brokers. He hit dead ends, he hit brick walls, and he got a few veiled warnings that chilled him. No one wanted to talk about the FEEA. The name itself seemed to generate fear, even 3 decades after its supposed demise. It's like it's been wiped from public memory, Silas, Mitch reported one evening, rubbing his temples. The records are not just sealed, they're gone. Or at least the accessible ones are. This is deeper than I thought. Someone went to great lengths to erase this agency's existence. So how do we prove they're back? Silas asked, frustrated. We find their new nest, Mitch said, tapping a pen against his teeth. Every agency, real or fake, needs an operational base. A place where they conduct their business. We need to find their office. Silas suddenly remembered something. There's an old abandoned government research facility about 20 miles north of Riverbend. Deep in the wilderness, on a huge tract of land the state quietly acquired years ago. It was supposed to be decommissioned, but I heard rumors that some private entity bought it. It's heavily guarded, fences, cameras, everything. Always seemed overkill for an abandoned facility. Mitch's eyes lit up. Tell me more. Silas drew a rough map on a notepad, detailing the facility's remote location, the single-access road, the security perimeter he'd glimpsed from a distance. I saw black sedans going in and out of there sometimes, similar to the one that showed up at my place, always late at night. Bingo, Mitch whispered, a grim smile spreading across his face. That sounds exactly like the kind of place a ghost agency would set up shop. Remote, private, and with existing infrastructure that can be repurposed without drawing too much attention. That's where we start. The next night, under the cover of a moonless sky, Silas and Mitch drove Silas's old Ford pickup, disguised, with mud and tree branches, towards the abandoned research facility. Silas, with his innate understanding of the terrain, had found a way to approach it from the rear, through a dense, almost impenetrable forest, avoiding the main, heavily monitored entrance. They left the truck hidden deep in the woods, then proceeded, on foot, moving like ghosts through the undergrowth. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. As they got closer, Silas could see the glint of razor wire atop a high chain-link fence, partially obscured by the trees. Security cameras, small red lights blinking, rotated slowly on poles. Impressive, Mitch murmured, adjusting the night vision binoculars he'd brought. Too impressive for an abandoned facility. This screams active, private, and highly sensitive. They found a weak point in the perimeter, a section where the fence had been partially breached by a fallen tree months ago, barely repaired. Silas, with his construction background, knew how to navigate such weaknesses. He helped Mitch through, then followed, his heart pounding in his chest. They moved stealthily through the overgrown grounds, past derelict buildings and rusting equipment, until they reached the main complex. It was a massive windowless structure, built of concrete and steel, with a single, heavily fortified entrance. But there were lights on inside, faint glows from behind thick, reinforced glass, and a low, almost imperceptible hum, like powerful machinery at work. As they crept closer to the main building, staying low in the shadows, Silas noticed something else. A faint, almost sickly sweet odor carried on the night breeze. It was metallic, chemical, and strangely familiar. "Do you smell that, Mitch?" Silas whispered, wrinkling his nose. Mitch sniffed the air. "Yeah." Like industrial the blare of the alarm ripped through the night, a harsh mechanical shriek that shattered the quiet of the wilderness. Silas and Mitch, propelled by sheer terror and the primal instinct to survive, crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping at their faces, thorns tearing at their clothes. Behind them, the shouts of the guard grew closer, punctuated by the thudding boots of what sounded like more pursuers. "This way!" Silas yelled, his voice hoarse, veering sharply off the crude path they'd forged, plunging deeper into a treacherous ravine he knew was riddled with sinkholes and tangled roots. He moved with the desperate agility of a man who understood every inch of this unforgiving terrain, Mitch scrambling to keep up, his labored breaths echoing in the darkness. They ran, for what felt like an eternity, the adrenaline a bitter taste in Silas's mouth. The alarm finally faded into a distant whine, replaced by the thrum of a helicopter, a menacing dragonfly circling somewhere above the tree line. They were being hunted. They finally collapsed, gasping, in a dense thicket of blackberry bushes, deep within the ravine. Silas pulled Mitch down, pressing a hand over his mouth. The helicopter's searchlight swept across the treetops above them, its blinding beam slicing through the darkness, moving closer, then passing. "They've got infrared," Mitch wheezed, wiping sweat from his brow. "We need to find water. Anything to mask our heat signature," Silas nodded, pulling himself up. "There's an old creek bed fed by underground springs, a few hundred yards from here. It's too narrow for a choppers to spot easily." They crawled, then stumbled, through the darkness, their bodies aching, until they finally reached the icy cold water of the hidden creek. They submerged themselves, shivering violently, the frigid water a shock to their systems, but a potential lifeline against the unseen eyes above. The helicopter continued its relentless circling, but the light, thankfully, did not return to their immediate vicinity. Hours later, long after the helicopter's drone had faded into the pre-dawn silence, they emerged, soaked and freezing, but alive. Silas guided them back towards where they'd hidden the pickup, his mind reeling from what he'd seen. "Glowing plants, Mitch," Silas muttered, his teeth chattering. "And Karen, in a lab. What the hell was that place?" Mitch pulled a thermal blanket from his pack, wrapping it around his shaking shoulders. "I don't know, Silas, but it wasn't a standard agricultural research facility. Those glowing plants. It suggests some kind of genetic manipulation, or perhaps a new form of bioluminescent crop. And if it's connected to a reactivated federal agency, then we're talking about something with massive implications, likely for profit or control, or both." They reached the truck, pulled off their wet clothes, and changed into the spare dry ones Mitch had packed. As Silas started the engine, Mitch pulled out a small, encrypted satellite phone. "I managed to grab this during the chaos," Mitch said, holding up a small device. "It's my emergency line. Untraceable for about one call." "Who are you calling?" Silas asked, his eyes still scanning the road ahead. "Someone who owes me a very big favor," Mitch replied, his face grim. "A former investigative journalist now. A reclusive blogger who knows how to handle sensitive information and how to make it go viral. Her name is Sarah Jenkins. If anyone can expose this agency and Karen Eldridge, it's her. But she won't touch it without irrefutable evidence." "What evidence do we have?" "The story, for one," Mitch said, "and the existence of that facility. But more importantly, I managed to grab this." Mitch reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, sleek USB drive. "When I was bypassing the security panel at the service entrance, I saw an open network port. I had a few seconds. I ran a quick script and downloaded whatever I could get my hands on. Could be nothing, could be everything. It's a risk, but it's our only shot." Silas looked at the small drive, a tiny piece of plastic that could either save them or bury them. They drove in silence, the truck rumbling through the pre-dawn darkness, heading back to Mitch's office. They arrived just as the sun was peeking over the horizon, bathing the grimy office in a weak orange glow. Mitch immediately plugged the USB drive into his most secure computer, its hard drive encrypted, its network connection routed through a series of anonymous proxies. Silas watched over his shoulder, his heart pounding. Files began to appear on the screen, a bewildering array of data: schematics, financial ledgers, encrypted communication logs, and scientific reports. Mitch, with practiced ease, began to sift through them, his eyes darting across the text, occasionally muttering to himself. "Here it is," Mitch finally said, his voice hushed, eyes wide. "Project Genesis. It's a bioengineering project. They're developing a new strain of genetically modified plant life, hyper-efficient, incredibly resilient, and able to thrive in virtually any environment, regardless of soil quality or water availability." Silas frowned. "So, what's wrong with that? Sounds like something that could solve world hunger." "It would, if it was for the public good," Mitch countered. scrolling further down. But listen to this. Phase 1. Controlled expansion into designated resource-rich areas. And look at the target locations listed here. They're all major agricultural regions, strategically important waterways, and areas with valuable mineral deposits, including the Blackwater River Valley. And Willow Creek Farm is listed as a primary test bed and distribution hub. Silas felt a cold dread wash over him. They want to take over, control the food supply, control the land, and the water, Mitch added, pointing to a section about a highly advanced proprietary irrigation system. The river was diverted to flush out old growth, prepare the land for Genesis deployment. Your bridge was an obstruction to their logistics. Its destruction wasn't about Karen's view, it was about clearing a path. And the FEEA? A front, Mitch confirmed, his voice laced with disgust. An enforcement arm. They use the guise of environmental protection to seize lands, suppress opposition, and expand their reach. Anyone who gets in their way is deemed an environmental hazard and dealt with. Like you, Silas. You were just inconvenient. Silas stared at the glowing screen, the full horror of the conspiracy unfolding before his eyes. His personal vendetta had stumbled into something truly monstrous. Karen Eldridge wasn't just a rich lady. She was a cog in a machine designed to seize control of vital resources backed by a shadowy, re-emerged power. We have to get this out, Silas said, his voice firm, his fear replaced by a burning sense of righteous anger. Everyone needs to know. Mitch nodded, his fingers all ready, flying across the keyboard, composing an email. I'm sending this to Sarah Jenkins. She's got a secure platform, but even she'll need more than this raw data. She'll need a witness, someone willing to go on record. He looked at Silas. Are you ready for that? Because once this goes public, there's no turning back. You'll be painted as a villain, a criminal who flooded a farm. But you'll also be the one exposing a global conspiracy. Silas thought of his destroyed bridge, his ruined company, and the threat of fake police. He thought of the glowing, unnatural plants, a terrifying vision of a controlled future. He had already lost everything. What else was there to fear? I'm ready, Silas said, his voice steady. Tell her I'll talk. I'll tell the world everything. Mitch finished the email, attached the encrypted files, and hit send. It's out there now. No going back. Just as he finished, the old desktop computer suddenly went dark. The screen flickered once, then died, leaving the room in a sudden, unsettling silence. Mitch tried to restart it, but it remained stubbornly lifeless. What was that? Silas asked, a prickle of unease crawling up his spine. Mitch tried the power button again, then checked the plugs. Nothing. It's dead. Completely. Fried. They must have traced the connection or known I was trying to access something. A remote kill switch. They're always watching, Silas. The silence in the room stretched, thick and oppressive. They had gotten the information out, but at what cost? Had they simply alerted the snake to their presence, and now it was closing in? They had sent a message, but they had also revealed themselves. The game had just escalated, from a desperate escape to an all-out information war. And the enemy had just shown they could strike silently, remotely, and with devastating precision. The race was on. The silence in Mitch's office after the computer died was a heavy, suffocating blanket. It wasn't just a fried motherboard, it was a declaration. They knew, they were watching, and the information, the terrifying truth of Project Genesis. And the revived FEEA was now a ticking time bomb. "They're coming for us," Silas stated, the words flat, devoid of emotion, yet ringing with chilling certainty. Mitch nodded, his face etched with grim resignation. Probably already on their way. That remote kill switch. It means they were actively monitoring my network. As soon as that data started flowing to Sarah's server, they shut us down. This office is compromised. "So what now?" Silas asked, pushing himself up from the chair. "We run again?" "Running won't save us in the long term," Mitch said, gesturing to the dead computer. "They have the resources. They'll just keep coming. We sent the signal. Now we wait for Sarah to light the fuse. But we can't wait here." They gathered what little they could, Mitch's encrypted satellite phone, a small duffel bag with a change of clothes, and a few energy bars. They slipped out of the office through a back alley, moving like shadows in the early morning light. The streets of Riverbend were still largely deserted, but every parked car, every closed storefront seemed to hum with unseen eyes. "Where do we go?" Silas whispered as they reached his pickup truck, still parked a few blocks away. "Somewhere public," Mitch replied, his mind already calculating. "Somewhere they can't just snatch us without drawing attention. A place with lots of cameras, lots of witnesses." Silas thought for a moment. "The Riverbend County Fairgrounds. The annual spring festival starts today. It'll be packed." Mitch's lips twitched into a rare, grim smile. "Perfect. A public spectacle for our public exposé." They drove to the fairgrounds, weaving through the already growing traffic of eager attendees. The air thrummed with the distant murmur of carnival music, the scent of popcorn and frying dough, and the excited chatter of families. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, terrifying world they had just left. They found a discreet spot to park and melted into the throng. Silas, with his rough hands and weary eyes, looked like any other working man attending the festival. Mitch, with his disheveled suit and intense gaze, seemed like a tired tourist. They blended for now. Mitch pulled out his satellite phone. "I need to confirm Sarah got the data." "This is it, Silas. Our one shot at getting this out before they silence us permanently." He spent tense minutes on the phone, the connection intermittent amidst the fairground's cacophony. Silas watched the crowd, every face a potential threat, every black car that drove past a harbinger of doom. He saw families laughing, children clutching balloons, young couples holding hands. He thought of his bridge, his life, all destroyed by a hidden cabal aiming to control the very essence of life. A fierce determination hardened his resolve. He wouldn't let them win. Finally, Mitch lowered the phone, a triumphant glint in his tired eyes. "She got it. She's working on it. Says it's going to take some time to verify everything, cross-reference the data, but she believes us. She's got a team of dedicated anonymous hackers helping her prepare it for wide release. She's aiming for a global broadcast." "When?" Silas asked, his voice barely audible above the fairground noise. "Tonight, she hopes. If she can get past their countermeasures. They're good, Silas. Very good. They shut down my computer the second I hit send. They'll be trying to block her." As the day wore on, Silas and Mitch moved through the fair, staying anonymous, staying alert. They ate lukewarm hot dogs, rode a few dizzying rides to blend in, and kept their eyes peeled. The tension was a constant low thrum beneath the festive atmosphere. Then, as dusk began to fall, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Silas saw them. Two men, in those familiar, impeccably tailored dark suits, moving with predatory efficiency through the crowd. No uniforms this time, but the same cold, unreadable faces. And behind them, partially obscured by a cluster of teenagers, he saw a familiar, infuriatingly elegant silhouette. Karen Eldridge. She was here, watching, directing. "They're here," Silas murmured, nudging Mitch. Karen, too. Mitch saw them, his jaw tightening. "They're tightening the net. They want to make sure we don't go public, or if we do, they want to control the narrative. They'll probably try to snatch us before Sarah can broadcast." Suddenly, the fairground's loudspeakers crackled to life, interrupting the carnival music. A burst of static, then a calm, authoritative female voice cut through the noise. It was Sarah Jenkins. "Good evening, citizens of Riverbend, and indeed, the world." Her voice resonated across the fairgrounds, amplified by the scattered speakers. "My name is Sarah Jenkins, and I'm here tonight to expose a truth that has been hidden for decades, a truth that threatens the very fabric of our food, our land, and our future." A hush fell over the crowd, conversations dying out, heads turning towards the loudspeakers. Silas and Mitch exchanged a wide-eyed glance. She was doing it. She was broadcasting it from the fairground's own system, a stroke of genius, or a desperate last resort. "For too long," Sarah's voice continued, gaining strength, "a shadowy organization has been operating in the dark under the guise of an agency long thought defunct, the Federal Environmental Enforcement Agency, and they are not what they seem." Silas saw the two men in suits stiffen, their heads snapping towards the nearest loudspeaker. Karen Eldridge's face, visible now, contorted with a mixture of shock and fury. "We have obtained irrefutable evidence," Sarah announced, her voice unwavering, "that this so-called agency is a front for Project Genesis, a bioengineering initiative designed to seize control of vital agricultural lands and water resources, threatening our food supply and our sovereignty." A murmur rippled through the crowd. People were exchanging confused, then worried glances. They destroyed the Blackwater Bridge, a key piece of local infrastructure to clear the way for their operations, Sarah declared, her voice now rising with indignation. They attempted to silence and abduct local businessman Silas Blackwood for retaliating against their actions, attempting to frame him as an environmental criminal. And their operations are being spearheaded by prominent local figure Karen Eldridge, whose Willow Creek farm is not just a farm, but a primary test bed for this insidious project. Chaos erupted. People started shouting, some in outrage, some in confusion. Karen Eldridge shrieked, a high-pitched, furious sound. The two men in suits, no longer subtle, pushed through the crowd, heading directly for the nearest loudspeaker tower, clearly trying to cut the feed. Silas and Mitch were immediately surrounded by a surge of panicked, curious people. It was both, a shield and a trap. The evidence, including schematics, financial ledgers, and communication logs, will be distributed globally within the hour, Sarah's voice declared, just before a sudden, sharp crackle of static cut her off completely. They had found the source. The fairgrounds plunged into a cacophony of shouts, murmurs, and the renewed, blaring carnival music. Security guards, confused by the sudden announcement, began to move through the crowd, trying to restore order. Silas and Mitch were suddenly shoved from behind. The two men in suits, having given up on the loudspeaker, were now directly behind them, their eyes locked on Silas with cold, murderous intent. "You're coming with us, Mr. Blackwood," one of them snarled, grabbing Silas's arm. Silas reacted on instinct, twisting free, shoving the man back into the confused crowd. Mitch, meanwhile, threw a quick, practiced jab that sent the other man stumbling. They ran, weaving through the panicked festival-goers, the men in suits hot on their heels. They were near the main exit when a black SUV, identical to the sedan, that had come to Silas's house screeched to a halt in front of them, blocking their path. The doors flew open, and 3 more men, equally imposing, poured out. They were surrounded. "It's over, Blackwood," a familiar voice purred. Karen Eldridge emerged from behind the SUV, her face a mask of furious calm. Her expensive clothes were slightly disheveled, but her eyes glittered with cold triumph. "You tried to expose us. A foolish mistake. Now you will disappear." Silas stared at her, then at the circle of unyielding men. This was it, the final stand. He had gambled everything, and it looked like he was about to lose. Just as the men in sabazam suits lunged, a sudden piercing wail filled the air. Not a carnival sound, but the unmistakable rising crescendo of police sirens. Red and blue lights flashed through the crowd, reflecting off the metal rides. Then, a voice boomed from a megaphone, cutting through the chaos. "This is the state police. Drop your weapons. Everyone, stay calm." Karen Eldridge's eyes widened in disbelief. The men in suits froze, their movements hesitant. "What is this?" Karen hissed, turning to one of her enforcers. "Who called them?" From the crowd, a disheveled figure emerged, pushing through the bewildered fairgoers. It was Jimmy the Hook Miller, Silas's foreman, his face grimy but triumphant. He held a well-used flip phone to his ear, a wide, challenging grin on his face. "He told me if anything ever went sideways, to call the state police and to tell him everything about a fake federal agency and a glowing plant lab," Jimmy yelled, pointing directly at Karen. "And I told him how you blew up my boss's bridge." "Lady!"